All right, next panel is going to focus on AI, changing the world as we know it, right? We're going to ask for Erick Ford to come up. Vice President, Stevens and Lee Public Affairs, also an energy sage. And Jason Gulya, coming in to my right, come on up. No backpacks allowed. And Jason is a professor of English at Berkeley College.
How you doing?
Doing great. Now you guys are going to share some more wisdom. Probably not as hard as the tower forecast, but still, AI is changing every single day, right? Every single day, so it's really not easy to keep up with. And I know Jason's done a great job. I know I've hosted him before, and he's one of the great leaders in the state in the field of AI and education. And so, delighted to have him here. And Erick is a leader in energy, right? These are very related, right? Energy is needed to produce those quick ChatGPT responses that I spoke about earlier, right? And we're going to need a whole hell of a lot of energy going forward. And so I'm excited to talk about this topic. We could talk, essentially, about AI plus energy plus the future, right? And how we can all take advantage of sort of the technology going forward. And so let's just do quick introductions. We'll start with Jason. Jason, what is, tell us about, what you do. Tell us about the best tool you've recently used relating to AI or feature, just to give people an example of something to be excited about. And Erick, you could do the same too. All right? Go ahead, Jason.
All right, cool. So I'm Jason Gulya. So I'm a professor of English and Applied Media at Berkeley College. So many of my students, vast majority of them, use AI in some form. Some surveys say college students, about 92% of them are using this technology. What else do you want to know? My favorite program, basically?
Yeah, what's the latest and greatest that's gotten you sort of jazzed about using AI?
One of the things that saves me so much time are the deep research tools. So one of the things I did recently was, I was looking at the topic. I was actually looking at AI and environmental impact and energy. So I popped it into ChatGPT's deep research. I did deep research through Perplexity, and I compared it, and that saves me so much time. Obviously, I had to do the verification, click the links and everything, but still, as a starting point, that was really, really good. So I'm a big fan of the deep research tools, and it does allow me to streamline things in a way that I haven't in the past.
Excellent. And just so we know, I tried to find the deep research tool in my ChatGPT app. I was using it while traveling, mostly to understand what kind of cars I was looking at. But how do you get to the deep research? Just sort of, I want to build on this real quick.
Oh, for ChatGPT?
For ChatGPT. Is it on the left and then down?
So it's right beneath it now.
It's
they
right
shifted
beneath
it. So when you do the search, there should be a deep research button right below that. They're constantly shifting around the user experience, the user design, but now it's right beneath the search.
Okay,
so
good. I've been called blind before, so this is all right. Erick, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Erick Ford, president of the New Jersey Energy Coalition. So when I'm looking at the technologies out there, particularly when I do a lot of work in the energy sector. I used to work at the Board of Public Utilities that regulates the entire energy and utility world. So I take a different perspective. The tools are great, right? I use them both, more or less dealing with my kids, if anything, right? I have a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 10-year-old. So if you guys can work on getting AI to babysit once in a while, that'd be fantastic, right? But more or less, that integration that we're seeing is paramount to the ability of society to move forward. I looked at this from many different perspectives. First off, think about the data centers that are out there. These aren't new. They've been under development for decades, if not a decade or more. When I was at the board, we were looking at the cloud infrastructure and questioning, what is the viability to make sure that's secure, safe, reliable, but also the information going in there is quality information, right? I think one of the things we'll see happen is as the energy and utility world start to utilize the technology, the regulatory constructs that are out there from both the federal and state levels will start stepping in there. Additionally, the insurance companies. One of the biggest things we looked at when I was at the board was, let's say there's a cyber attack, right? Who's responsible for that at the end of the day? But also, how is that determined, right? There was an incident years ago where a regulated entity had a breach of all things, a CD, right? Remember those things? And the insurance insured the physical CD, but not the information actually on the CD. So that entity actually had to pay out a huge lump sum to everybody who had their Social Security numbers taken. So there's going to be a lot driving it. But going back to the type of technology I prefer when it comes to ChatGPT, I use ChatGPT, but I also will use the other forms that are out there too, just to check the information, make sure what I'm getting is verified and good. But I also go back to knowing the research that I've done and understanding to verify. For example, my daughter recently asked Alexa, we have a lot of them in our house, what the Statue of Liberty is made out of. And Alexa said steel. We all know that's incorrect. It's made of copper. Maybe the inside is steel, but the outside, the actual statue, is copper, right? So I think looking at the technology, we have to ask the question, what is it being used for, and making sure that it's being used properly, and also the information there is correct. Now, on the other side, we're talking about energy usage from AI and what that impact is. Let's take a step back over the last 5 years. In New Jersey, we've lost 4,100 megawatts of power in the state. Those are power plants that have turned off, gone, disappeared. Today, we are at a power crunch where if you want power, you may be waiting 5, 6, 7 years to get power to your house, your new manufacturing facility, what have you. And you may need to think about alternative ideas of looking at that power, which is also where AI and data centers come in. These data centers need power. Some need 100 megawatts. Some are even up to 1,000 megawatts. That's basically a nuclear power plant, a full-scale nuclear power plant, by the way. So there's a couple of opportunities there. If we build data centers, they're going to need power. That means somebody could think about the risk profile of that investment and say, I can afford to now build a power plant because here's the 1,000 megawatts going over here, and then I can sell them to the rest of the market. And it's also understanding our entire market construct that we live in New Jersey. But I'll stop there. I don't want to take up all the time. Go ahead.
No, we'll circle back to that because energy really is so critical to the future, right? And solutions are going to take some time. On the other hand, there's some new technology, which is exciting. But let's go back to AI and how you're viewing it. I think a lot of people, Jason, are really curious about AI in education, right? We know all the students are using it. My daughter's using it as a shortcut, unfortunately, and I can't stop her, right? And there's a concern about critical thinking, right? We're losing our critical thinking, right? So some research has said that. That's a problem, even for ourselves, right? Who knows how to get from one place to another without using Google Maps? Not me, because I get lost all the time, and my orientation stinks. But sometimes we just turn off our brains, sometimes if we get used to a certain technology, and that's sort of something that's of concern, right? So Jason, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think many of the things that come out, many of these questions about AI and critical thinking and analytical skills and all that stuff is sort of connected to what Erick's talking about, right? So there's this focus on verification, this focus on really not leaning too much on one tool, which I think for many of us seems so obvious. But for my students, that's a little bit of a mental shift that many of them will know. And for the vast majority of them, if they're using AI, they're using ChatGPT, they will run a search query through there. And there is this mindset shift when they start to think about it a little bit less like a search engine, which for most students, that is the default. That is how they approach it. They think about ChatGPT as Google. They put in a search query, and get an answer, and they go on from there. And I'm starting to see that start to shift where students are using more than one tool. Many of my students are moving actually towards Gemini, because I think it's under the Google umbrella. But they're starting to get the sense that they need to verify, they need to have this holistic approach in a way that I think is good, that I think is healthy. And then two, I think about how this is going to change going forward. And this comes back, this is education-based, but it also comes back to energy too. I think one of my big takeaways for Erick's comment is just how interconnected everything is. That we tend to, and for me, I want to keep everything in their neat sectors. I want to say this is AI in education, this is AI in energy, this is AI in marketing, or whatever it is. And as I watch this technology just evolve, one of the things that I'm learning is how poorly that mindset will help me for the future, because it is very much interconnected. And one of the things I experience with my students now is, as I mentioned before, the vast majority of my students come in already using some form of this technology. And as we talk about the ethics and morality and all of these big social questions around this technology, a lot of them will think about energy. And they'll start to do research, and they'll try to figure out, how much energy is this using, how much water is it using, and go from there. And for many of my college students, they actually find that research very frustrating, because it's very opaque. They find these sources that give them some information, but a lot of it is sort of guesswork. And for them, that's sort of the frustrating bit, that my students want to think about those big questions about society and energy and environmental impact. And sometimes they feel like even once they commit to that, and they do that research, and they have these, whether they're using AI tools or whatever else to find that research, they're starting to hit roadblocks. They're trying to figure out, well, what does that mean for their future? And for them, for my students, they're 18 years old, 19 years old, the vast majority of them, and they're like going into this. They're going into a job market, and they're already getting questions about AI at interviews, and they're worried that they're not going to have the handle, the handle that they need to have in order to get those jobs, and even more to think about the big carbon footprint, environmental impact of this technology. So that's their frustrating part. So that's my kind of long rambling sentence, or long rambling answer, which it sort of is by design, because one of the things I need to think about is just how interconnected all of these conversations actually are.
Yeah, and I just want to ducktail off of that. One of the comments you were making there brought a thought to my mind about the power usage that ChatGPT alone just uses. And I had my team do some research, actually back in December, and we put together some data points that we've been using the last 4 or 5 months. You think about ChatGPT consumes 227,000 megawatts a year to work. And that's just the data centers. Your iPhones and the smartphones, just to get a full charge, about 20 watts. That means every day you're recharging your phone, right? In my house, we have at least 4 of those, plus the iPads, plus everything else, right? So it just adds up, and that adds up to be a lot of power just for that type of system to operate. Now you think about the different data centers all over the country. We have about 3,000 data centers total around the country, 6,000 projected by 2030. That's a 20% growth every year, give or take. And I'm not a mathematician, my brother is, so I usually call him to ask, how we do that. How do we get to that better number? But you got to think about the amount of power. But it's not just the power that's going to be needed, it's that transmission piece. So when you go up the turnpike in New Jersey, or down the turnpike, whichever way you're going, you see these humongous power lines, right? They're just huge. They're going up the turnpike. Those actually come out of Salem, New Jersey. Those are coming from the nuclear power plants and literally taking power from one end of the state to the other, transmitting that power. And as we're seeing this around the region, more transmission is necessary. There are data centers trying to be built in Virginia right now, and they need power. The need there to get that transmission line is coming from Pennsylvania through Maryland into Virginia, because Maryland, just as New Jersey, has instituted policies that make it very difficult to build power plants. So if you want to build a power plant today in New Jersey, unless you're doing solar or you got some sort of technology that is low emissions, you're going to have to build transmission lines, because Pennsylvania has the power. So you need an extension cord from Pennsylvania into Virginia to power those data centers. Or you do something else, on-site generation, using fuel cell technology that doesn't have any emissions, right? So there are different technologies out there, and those are being adopted and looked at. But the question is then, You take a look at the financing, and that is a driver of this. Private equity is a huge driver of all this because they are all making the investments. J.P. Morgan and Thomas Edison built the electric grid together. It wasn't Edison doing it on his own. He needed a funder. J.P. Morgan was the guy that did it. So we have to always remember that the money has to think about where is that investment and is it feasible. That's why we have this regulatory construct that's been around for over 100 years in New Jersey and other states and actually in our country too. So this is why I say, looking at AI and the data centers and the usage, I think will have a transforming impact. But the areas that are regulated, like the energy sector, are going to help to bring the regulatory constructs into place that are going to be necessary to make sure it's safe, right? Again, the technology is great, but it's only as good as the information we put into it. Think about the engineering firms. They do a lot of designs, and you want to make sure that solar design is right. You want to make sure that power plant design is right. The college education is being educated properly. I mean, think about this. Someone made a good point to me the other day. The doctors that I'm going to have in 20, 30 years, because by the way, I'm 45, right, are using ChatGPT today, right? They go to medical school. I went in medical school. That's great. But, what if the information's wrong, right? So that hands-on experience is so vital out there to understanding how it all works. But more or less, when we're looking at the energy sector, we just saw the power grid in Spain and Portugal go down yesterday. People are trying to figure out what happened. Well, we're not going to get a report for at least 6 to 10 months. And that report is going to have different ideas. And by the way, our state went through a similar thing. Everybody remembers Superstorm Sandy. We learned a lot from that. There comes a point you have to understand and think about what a resilience dividend looks like, right? You make investments into something and yes, it's going to cost a lot. But the question is, when you need it, does it work or not? And that's when you find out whether or not that investment was truly worth it. It's insurance at the end of the day. Our state, over the last decade, has made significant improvements to our energy sector and our utility sector. Our utilities have made vast investments throughout the state, which is why you see the ability of information and data in this state to transmit and work the way it does. And that is why there are a lot of data centers in Secaucus, by the way, right outside the New York Exchange. So I'll stop right there.
All right, and that provides a lot of food for thought, especially, Thomas Edison. Remember, not only did he refine the light bulb, not invent, refine, but the critical thing was the electrical grid, right? I mean, that was really revolutionary, and we were proud as a state to have him here as the world's greatest innovator at the time. So questions, let's get to questions. I know you have questions about AI. Any questions about AI or energy or nuclear or fusion or whatever, right? Or solar or wind power.
Jim, I have one.
Go ahead.
So you mentioned the grid, Eric, right? And we know PJM just had some issues. Prices are going to be going up. Is there AI technology for both the consumer and the business to start thinking about energy efficiency, right? You have like those Nest thermostats and things like that, and can it predict brownouts and different things like that? Just curious.
Yeah. So actually, there's an organization called NERC that actually spends a lot of time on this, and it's been around for decades. They put out a report every year and every 6 months on what's happening on the grid, both regional in our area, but also throughout the country. Gives a risk profile of winter and summer. So that's actually already being done, right? It's just taking that report and sticking in ChatGPT and tell it, hey, can you summarize this, I guess, right? Because it is like a 300-page document, right? You think about the Nest, honestly, I don't have one, but other people probably do. Is it helpful? Probably it can be efficient. The programs out there I know can be helpful. PJM, yes, the prices are going to go up. And by the way, they're going to go up again, because right now New Jersey imports 4,500 megawatts of power. And again, we close 4,100 megawatts, so we have a deficit in this state. It's going to go up. It's our own fault. That's the reality. So, by the way, Maryland has the same issue, right? So to answer your question, is there technology out there? Yeah, I'm sure there is. I'm sure. I know Google. I've interacted with them. They have and working on technology in this field. So is Amazon. I know they was it Amazon that partnered with PSE&G years ago on this stuff too? Yeah. So you have the integration of technology companies working with utilities and energy companies on this. So it is happening. The question is how much of it is inside and outside the regulatory constructs. So.
With the 47th administration making all the rollbacks of all of the safety and utility and programmatic rules that are keeping us supposedly safe and keeping us supposedly in a good place, do you think that, like, they're pushing for more coal, they're pushing for more carbon, do you think that that's going to happen within the next 4 years, or do you think the states are going to be able to push back against some of the federal lessening of restrictions?
Well, so each state can establish their own renewable energy portfolio standard, like we have in New Jersey. So we do have standards that have already been in place. There's been legal battles over this over the years. Supreme Court said that states can set their own standards for generation. So yeah, so we've already done that, right? The federal government can do what they do, but you still have state regulations. You know, the DEP, for example, instituted emission rules a couple years ago through using Executive Order 100 that Phil Murphy signed that reduces the amount of emissions that come out of power plants, right? So in order to operate in New Jersey, in order to have a permit, you have to be able to be in compliance with that permit to be able to operate a facility in New Jersey. And that's just the reality. The federal government can do so much as they do, but then state regulations are still going to exist. Now, if that's something that someone's going to try and fight with, you know, I'm sure they're going to find a law firm that's going to be willing to pick them up and, you know, charge them a lot of money, because that's going to be a huge fight. But, you know, you think about years ago, before we were talking about data centers and AI and all that, and we were looking at that there was just a flat growth over the next 10 years, and all of a sudden now there's a big push. Even Arizona was looking at, you know, what are they doing to protect their current power plants out there, which, by the way, were operating by coal, right? So it's thinking about more or less how do we ensure resilience and reliability of our energy sector through no matter what type of time it is, right? Because if you look at the economy, you have probably 9 to 10 sectors that are above the energy and utility world, right, that make a lot of money, but they don't exist without them, right? So our entire economy, which, think about this, Alexander Hamilton wandered into Paterson, New Jersey, and saw the falls there and realized the opportunity there. And they built that into an industrial town using the waterfalls to create the energy necessary for manufacturing there, which then Thomas Edison reused those falls to make electricity. So it's thinking about how do we make our system resilient and reliable and guarantee the power that is available when necessary. Because if we don't, if there's no certainty, by the way, you know, the last panel was talking about risk and investments and insurance. You know, if you're not making sure that there is certainty and the risk profile is completely understood, and by the way, the regulatory framework allows it to operate in a necessary way, then the companies will make investments in other states. It's that simple. And we are one of 50 states that have to compete with each other for those jobs and those job creations, investment dollars. You know, you think about it this way. If you want to build a data center, you need construction workers, you need electricity, you need everything else. All those people showing up to work are going to stop and get gas. They're going to stop at a Wawa or a Quick Check, a diner. They're going to pay a toll, and then they're going to get to work. They're going to be there dealing with the material. The impacts that happen are monumental. They're small, but when added up, they're a large number. It's like taking a small bite out of a big apple, right? You take enough bites, all of a sudden you're eating the whole apple. A good example also to look at this is when they refuel nuclear power plants in Salem. There are not enough hotel rooms in Salem County. Think about that, when they repower that. Because the amount of people that are required, it's just astronomical. It's a huge number, right? And it turns Salem County into a hub of economic, not craziness, but the pizza shops, they place their orders based on the dough, just to think of just knowing when the plants will be refueling, right? So, it's all interconnected, and we have to think about more or less building that reliability and resilience, not just make sure the power's flowing, but also that, are we planning right? Are we looking at this right? So for example, we saw these plants retiring, and not just in New Jersey, but throughout PJM, they've been retiring. The question is what are we doing to plan to make sure we have the necessary power replacing that? Now, PJM's job, if you ever look at what their job is, to make sure that there's enough power flow. And that was the original intent of it.
I'm gonna just because we're running out of time.
Yeah,
I want
sorry.
to make sure. Any other questions while we wait for questions? Jason, is there any new technology that's going to help lessen the need of energy from AI systems? Isn't it getting better? Anything you're hearing on the street there?
Yeah, and one of the things that I think a lot about, and I talk to my students about too, is how renewables fit into this. Right, solar power, wind power, how, my understanding is that a lot of times, that can be used for the kind of intermittent parts, right? One of the big obstacles is once you have renewable energy worked into the whole system, how do you cover for when you can't power it with those things, right? Can it be stored, or does it force you to use fossil fuels, or whatever it is? And so that's one of the things I think about. I don't know if that's really an answer, but trying to figure out, one of the things I worry about is if we have, an administration that kind of pulls back the investment in renewables, what does that mean going forward? What does that mean for those renewables if there's less investment there? So that's more of a question than anything else, but that's something I sort of worry about.
Just the question right there. I want to be cognizant of our time. We only have a few more minutes. Go ahead, quick.
So in the prior panel, we talked about the recession approaching. Since I'm a business coach and working with startups time to time, I know that we all know that there have been lots of layoffs, huge layoffs, and that forces people to be entrepreneurs. That increases forced entrepreneurship. So people are looking to renewable energy as a field. What do you recommend? How do you see the future of renewable energy entrepreneurship, and what aspect would you recommend to someone who wants to go in a venture in that field?
Quick answer.
Yeah, I would tell them the energy sector and utility sector is one of the best places to be in during a recession because everybody needs power. The first question that comes up whenever there's a recession is to the utility and energy companies, what shovel-ready projects do you have to go? That's what happens. So recession hits, it's a great opportunity because they're looking for jobs. The government is, right? So.
Okay, any other questions? Any other questions? Right here.
This might be a fully loaded question and maybe not one to ask when you're trying to wrap up, but it's more for the professor, right? So I'm a small business owner. I own a co-working space in East Brunswick. It's called Office Evolution, so shameless plug. I listen to AI panels a lot, and one that caught my eye was hearing small businesses talking about potentially replacing the workforce from people to AI, robots. So instead of having 20 people in a room, and for someone like me who's a space renter, I'm thinking, oh, do I need to move to data centers now? That's what I'm gonna be renting out. But in terms of students, right, how are you kind of preparing them for that? So the jobs now are gonna be replaced with robots. What kind of are the critical skills that they need now compared to what we needed, 20 years ago?
It's a great question. It's something that my students are sort of terrified about. So this is one of the big pain points for college students right now, trying to figure out how to, and I'll kind of do this as a short answer because I know that we need to wrap up.
Good luck.
But one of the big shifts is thinking about college education less with the pipeline model. So many colleges have been moving towards a college to workforce pipeline, right? That's been sort of the ideal, that you get your degree and you get slotted into blank, whatever that job is. And so one of the big things that's happening is starting to shift away from that, because one of the big challenges is, what if you don't know what those jobs are? Right? How do you create a pipeline for someone you don't know what it's going to look like and what the skills are going to be? So, I listen to a lot of people who talk about the big skills being adaptability, flexibility, so critical thinking. I think these are becoming more and more the forefront, and I think that's going to continue to happen. So it'll be about fostering those skills and giving environments for students to really focus on that. And then the big challenge is going to be how you have that balance, because you do want students to then be able to say, well, that's going to help me do blank. And that's what I think is sort of being navigated right now, and that's something that I think, nationally, but even internationally, is giving college students a lot of worry. Once you don't have that pipeline, which can be sort of comforting, how do you move forward? So I think it's going to be much more critical thinking, flexibility, those sort of skills, and less like competency skills. Like you do this, this, and this, and suddenly, boom, you're an engineer. I think we're going to see a shift sort of away from that model in general, and that can be a good thing. It can be a space for innovation, but it's also very worrying and very anxiety-producing, especially for students going out to the job market. And that's my short answer.
That is a great answer. Thank you so much. And just one thing on that note, in the past, there used to be, you need to be a coder. You need to go to school for computer science. So one of the wonderful things that AI has done is you don't need to be a coder anymore to make an app. You can talk to an AI program and you can create an app, a business. So the entrepreneurial possibilities are endless. So anyway, I'm going to end on a positive note. Thank you so much, guys.